Pirating has been around for a long time, thousands of years certainly, and has been carried out in different ways in each era. In antiquity, people who lived in regions with poor soil fertility or few animals to hunt a living from it. In the Middle Ages, it was done alongside expeditions in search of land and wealth. In modern times, it was adopted by colonial nations and empires, such as England, and by men left behind by political and economic changes who were looking to survive. While it has been around for so long, it was only in the Caribbean over a period of a few decades, particularly during the 18th century, that a series of elements, visual and behavioral, began to shape the image of pirates that we have today. When we speak of Caribbean piracy, we are referring mainly to the English, French, Spanish, and, to a lesser extent, the Dutch, all of whom represented nations that ventured into maritime expansion, territorial clashes, and the colonization of the Americas. The Caribbean pirates sported a series of distinctive features that set them apart from most other pirates. Their flags symbolized their claim to fame over other pirates, and also proved their strength over potential prey during their raids. Sea robbers have three names: pirates, privateers, and buccaneers. Basically, they are all pirates. Privateers and buccaneers are subtypes of pirates. Back then, exploiting the American and African colonies had turned into the world's main economic activity. Each year, fortunes in gold, silver, timber, slaves, and ivory, among other things, crossed the Atlantic. And this is when the privateers came in. Nations that did not have their own colonies, or had too few of them to provide large profits, such as England, France, and the Netherlands, would encourage raids on the ships of other countries, especially the Portuguese and Spanish. To make these sabotaging operations look official, they used the letter of marque, a document that allowed a ship's captain and his crew to chase down and attack any vessel flying the flag of an enemy country. Looting was no longer a crime, but a legal and taxable business, as long as it was on the backs of others. As for the Buccaneers, this is how the French pirates who arrived in present-day Haiti around 1600 were called. The name comes from the French word boucan, meaning the grill with which they smoked meat. These pirates quickly took over the then Spanish colony and made up their own rules, without following anyone, which eventually attracted people of all kinds, including former convicts, fugitive slaves, and those hunted by the Catholic Inquisition. But did pirates use black flags with a skull and crossbones? This is the classic pirate flag, which goes by the name of Jolly Roger. No records exist of its provenance or the reasons that led pirates of all nationalities to use a flag featuring a skull and two crossed tibias. We do know that it became commonplace in the early 18th century. Although the first evidence of the use of this flag dates back to the 1700s, it was not immediately popular among pirates. Renowned and busy pirate captains of the late 17th and early 18th centuries preferred symbols that distinguished their identity and that of their ships. The consolidation and growth of pirate strongholds, such as Tortuga, probably helped all pirates to eventually adopt the best-known flag as the only symbol on their ships, as if all were part of the same nation. The vessels of a pirate company were often better known than their captain's face in the strongholds they built. These fearsome black flags were flown at the highest masts of ships, which were quite unlike the romanticized visions spread by the film industry. Pirates preferred small, light vessels, which made them fast when attacking and escaping. The fleets under assault were made up of merchant vessels, usually escorted by other warships. Hence, fast and practical ships were paramount. Life on board these ships was not easy, and the crew, often small, had quite specific duties which had to be carried out expertly. Otherwise, the journey would be put at risk. Dividing up duties within the ships followed a pattern that had existed since the early modern period. Richard Hawkins, in his travel diary from the 16th century, described these duties used throughout the period of the Great Navigations. The roles were the chief pilot, who handled the rudder, tiller, and other instruments essential for steering the ship; The masters, the best educated men in the crew, divided into master steward, master boatman, and master carpenter. The cannoneers and gunners, responsible for managing the ship's artillery equipment, guns, and finally, the captain was responsible for keeping order on the ship, giving duties to the deckhands. Difficulties at sea were not just about maintaining and managing the ship and its equipment. The lengthy periods inside the vessel, the poor personal hygiene, and the difficulty in preserving essential food to replenish vitamins, such as fruits and vegetables, led to a wide variety of illnesses. Sailors were often dehydrated or malnourished and suffered from infections, ulcerations of the extremities, dysentery, and a variety of fevers. Scurvy and beriberi were common diseases among sailors, respectively due to a lack of vitamins C and D, the former of which could be fatal in many cases. Oral hygiene was practically absent. They chewed on sticks in their mouths, which was a common way of cleaning their teeth until the 18th century. Bathing? Absolutely not. And their clothes were only washed when they got to their destination, or not even that. Ships lacked toilets, so they would make a hole in the bow, where they could unleash their insides and the excrement would drop into the water. The weapons used by pirates followed, up to a certain point, the technological developments of the modern period, especially between the 16th and 17th centuries, when privateers and pirates were sponsored and equipped by the major economic powers of the time. During the 18th century, due to the growing social exclusion they began to suffer, pirates had greater difficulties in getting more modern and efficient equipment and weapons, which were used by the soldiers and naval officers who chased them. Nevertheless, arquebuses, muskets, and pistols were common firearms, easily found in a pirate's hands. In turn, swords were indispensable for battles during raids and chases, since firearms did not fire repeatedly and the gunpowder needed for shooting was often wet. The pirates actually wore bandanas wrapped on the head, which was a wise and handy measure against the sunshine at sea or in the tropics. They carried several pistols and bandoliers attached around their shoulders, another reasonable idea, since should any of them fail as a result of the ammunition getting damp, a second or third spare would be useful. They wielded cutlasses, and the elected leaders were eye-catching and charismatic figures. The pirates' getaway points were Tortuga and Port Royal. Not only did they hide from their pursuers, but they lived in organized societies, ranging from brothels to trading posts, where the cargo from ship robberies was sold to middlemen, who resold it without the risk of having it seized by the authorities. Caribbean piracy was carried out by men who were socially ostracized, which set its members apart from other pirates who lived in other areas and at other periods. Although they were known as brutal men, pirates were very disciplined. They even followed a series of rules. They also accepted many aspects that are still considered taboo today, such as the notion of democracy and homosexual marriage. Historians have suggested that all male pirate crews were often homosexuals, such as pirate captain Edmund Cook, who for many years traveled with an unknown valet who, when captured, was forced to confess that his master had often practiced sodomy on him in England, in Jamaica, and once in these seas before Darien. The confession did not seem to offend the remaining crew. There were rarely women on pirate ships, but there were female pirates who dressed in men's clothes, the most famous of whom were Mary Read and Anne Bonny. The recruitment system for pirates took place in the metropolitan ports. When the ship's captain had finally managed to gather the crew he needed to set sail, he laid down the rules for sharing the loot. The parties involved were then informed that, once the plundering was complete, the goods would be sold. Their total value was calculated, travel costs were deducted, 1/3 was given to those who had financed the venture, for example, and the rest was shared out. Naturally, the captain would get the biggest cut, something like 1/3 of the loot. The first-time sailors would get the spare change. However, whether a veteran or a rookie, the sailor who first cried out "sail in sight" would receive 100 coins. If there was fighting and a sailor was maimed, he would be compensated. Anyone who lost an eye or an arm received 600 coins. The loss of a finger, toe, or hand was compensated with 100 coins. These duties had to be carried out to the utmost by the captain. In return, sailors were required not to be cowardly or drunk when they were about to be attacked, which, despite everything, was a common thing. Pirates entered this life motivated by greed, but survived day-to-day life on board fueled by alcohol, preferably rum. One story goes that it once took a pirate ship 3 days to capture a galleon due to a lack of sober men. However, there were occasions when they were allowed to party and drink until they fell over. Things were going fine for the pirates, but the 18th century was the turning point, from which moment on it was all downhill, especially in 1713, when the Treaty of Utrecht was signed. Pirates were deprived of their licenses to plunder the seas near the American continent. The treaty was meant to put an end to the wars between the European powers. As a result, the pirates took a different course, especially since they now had no reason to attack the major European powers. Since they were already used to life at sea, with its robberies, raids, and easy money, they no longer wanted to go back to the city and deal with unemployment. So they continued stealing and converted to piracy once and for all. This time, however, it was done without royal military support. Some historians say that, of the over 5,000 pirates who existed in the 16th and 17th centuries, only 300 remained. Only in 1856, with the Declaration of Paris, did piracy become a crime. This meant that any kind of theft or looting on the high seas was against the law. As a result, pirates took other paths and ideologies. We can point to some of the factors that brought about the end of piracy, such as the end of slavery and the Industrial Revolution. Piracy's main source of income throughout the 18th century had been the capture of slave ships and their sale to landlords in the American colonies. In 1833, slavery was definitively abolished throughout the English Empire, and in 1861, following the Wars of Secession, the United States abolished slavery. With industrialization accelerating, ships made of metal and powered by steam started to be produced. The fleets were gradually replaced by these new machines. If confronting the mighty armadas of English sailing ships during the 18th century had already been a daunting task for the pirates, fighting the English Navy became virtually impossible once they embraced these new technologies. It was the end, or at least the near extinction, except for a few isolated cases of any piracy activity. From that moment on, pirates disappeared from the sea and started to feature in the imagination and on the pages of literary works, helping to shape the romanticized view of those men and their activities in the Caribbean seas that has been built up and continues to this day.